On behalf of the Personal Histories Project, I welcome you to today's event. The aim of this afternoon, along with all of our other Personal Histories events, is to interview leading figures in science and archaeology in order to allow their memories to be shared and recorded, in order to help us understand the development of our discipline. Our events are made available online as educational films, so I should make clear that this event is also being recorded, and so we ask for you to be filmed. If you have any queries about this, please get in touch with us at the end. We're delighted to be able to introduce someone who has experienced his fair share of filming, famed for his acting career and for presenting the popular archaeology programme Time Team. Between 1994 and 2012, Time Team inspired thousands of students and members of the public to become involved in archaeology. The programme's impact on the wider awareness of our subject is immeasurable. All of our team, including Pamela Jane Smith, who founded the Personal Histories Project in 2006, we'd like to thank our funders, the MacDonald Institute for Archaeological Research and the Thriplow Charitable Trust. The project is run on an entirely voluntary basis and relies heavily on donations, and of course these are very gratefully received. After his presentation, Tony will be taking questions from the audience, and this will be chaired by fellow Time Team member Dr. Helen Geek. As an incentive, we are offering a bottle of wine to the first 3 undergraduates who ask a question. And chocolate to the first 3 members of the audience who are under 18 who ask a question. When we come to questions, please wait for the microphone to be delivered to you so we can actually hear what you're saying. And please tell us your name before we begin. But for now, we are honoured to introduce a man who has done so much to communicate archaeology to the public, to spread enthusiasm for the subject, and, of course, to make us laugh. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Tony Robinson.
God, I hope there's that much applause when I finish. Let me get one thing off my chest first of all. The sum total of my academic qualifications is 4 O-levels. The good news is one of them was in history. The bad news is that I got grade 6 and grade 7 was a failure. So in a way, it seems outrageous that I should come to the epicenter of British academe and start spouting off. But it is billed as a conversation, and so as much of the weight of this afternoon as possible, I gratefully return to your shoulders. And anyway, why shouldn't us ignoramuses occasionally storm the stages of Cambridge? So on behalf of all the baldricks of Great Britain, I stand here unashamedly, which reminds me, they gave us a very posh lunch. We had guinea fowl, and the chef did 4 tiny, tiny turnips. And when it was over, I went to the loo to make myself presentable. And this is a new pair of jeans for Cambridge. And I tried to zip them up, and I couldn't. They were stuck halfway. And I called to my wife, and she came in. And I said, what am I going to do? I can't go in front of those people with my fly buttons only half zipped up. She said, don't worry, I'll do it, she said. So she zipped them all the way down in order to be able to take a run. Ladies and gentlemen, under this shirt, it's hell. So if I start waving my arms in a frenzy and it just gets too much for you, just signal, will you? And I'll turn my back and just face you. But anyway, I thought what I would do is just tell you a little bit about my life up to Time Team, so you could get something of the context of why I was involved in Time Team, why I feel so passionate about the kind of things that I am passionate about, why I present it in the way that I do, etc., etc. My mum and dad were both working class young people living in Hackney. And in the Second World War, my dad was stationed, he was in the RAF, he was stationed just outside Aberdeen. He didn't have what they call a great war. He was an 18-year-old fitter, patching up the Hurricanes and Spitfires so that other posher 18-year-olds can fly up in the air and shoot down the Germans. But when he was stationed in Scotland, there were an awful lot of Canadians stationed there at the same time. And he joined the Canadian Force Dance Band and learned to play boogie piano. And he got really, really very good at it. And when the war was over, he had a choice. He could either go to Canada and become a professional musician along with my mum, or they could go back to the semi-detached house that they had just bought in South Woodford a few years before the war, and my dad could continue working as a local government officer for the London County Council. My dad was very, very bright and had won a place at London University, but because he was the second son of a working-class Hackney family, he'd never been able to go to university, so getting this job for the LCC was the epitome of everything that he had always struggled for. So he turned his back on the show business career. My mum had joined the WAF at the same time that my dad was in the RAF and spent the whole of the Second World War defeating Hitler by doing amateur dramatics in Reading. So she was, she'd very much got the show business bug as well. They moved back to South Woodford, and I think that from a very young age, well, two things happened from a very young age. First of all, both my dad and my mum used to tell me all these stories about their life prior to my birth, and in particular about the war, because the war years were the most fantastic years of their life. They were not people who would have had any kind of social mobility, let alone physical mobility in any other way, really, apart from the fact that the war happened. So there they were, having all these adventures, silly, stupid little adventures, but they bored a hole into their skull, and they just loved to tell me about them, and I loved the way that they told these stories. So really, almost from the moment that I left the womb, I was having stories told to me, real stuff about my mum and dad's youth. And I think through that, I became aware, almost from day one, that now wasn't the only time there had ever been. There had been other times, equally exciting, where people like my mum and dad had been my age and a bit older and had had adventures. And by extension, that must have been true of their mum and dad and 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 their mum and dad. So instinctively, although I don't think I would have been pretentious enough to say it, but I had an instinctive awareness that I was part of this extraordinary continuum of the adventure of human history that we're on. And it never occurred to me that it was a subject. And it was so liberating, I think, in retrospect, not to think of history as a subject, not even to think of that word. It was just, as far as I was concerned, it was stuff. Why, of course you'd be interested in that stuff. It was no less fundamental to me than walking and eating and breathing. How did I know who I was unless I knew where I came from? How could I possibly understand the language that I used, the architecture there were? As Mick Aston would say, the very shape of the roads on which we all walk, unless I had a little glimmer of what had happened in the past. And when I was about 10 years old, and I suddenly realized they gave marks for that stuff, I thought, they're so stupid. Of course you're going to want to know that stuff. It's easy. You just do it. You just are it. And it's always struck me as an enormous tragedy that so many kids don't feel that and feel that history is just another of those subjects that they bash up against every day from 9 in the morning till 4 in the afternoon and make the right noises and vaguely remember the right stuff so that it'll open enough so that they can get through that and then till they hit the next Berlin Wall. I hate that. And I'm so glad that I was liberated from that. But the other thing about my mum and dad was that they encouraged me as a performer, and from very early on, I seemed to have the facility to do good timing. I was going to try and make a joke about doing timing badly and saying goodbye. Forget it. And when I was 12, my mum and dad read in the Daily Express, which was their newspaper of choice. Not actually mine now, but it was. But the newspapers were great too, because things like the cartoons. I remember there was a political cartoonist called Cummings, and although I'm sure his party line and mine would slightly diverge now, nevertheless, the fact that you could get just this insight into a little bit. As far as I was concerned, there was no difference between history and politics. It was like, but you could get this insight into this narrative just by having a laugh. And I kind of, I always felt that. But anyway, in the Daily Express, there was this article that they wanted kids to be in a show in London's West End, and my mum and dad said, "Do you want to audition for it?" And I said, "Yeah." And so I went up for an audition, and I got through the audition, and they sent me away, and I had to come back a fortnight later and do another audition. They sent me away again. It was just like X Factor. When I watch X Factor, it is just like my life was at that time. Well, nearly. I did 6 of these auditions, at the end of which they gave me a part in the show, which meant that I had to take a term off school. Result. And we rehearsed, and we eventually put the show on. And on the first night, there were 26 curtain calls. This is true. Even the stage carpenter came on stage and took a bow. And it was the original version of the stage musical of Oliver. And up until that time, to put it in its context, every successful musical in the West End had been American. Carousel, Paint Your Wagon, even West Side Story, roughly the same time as us. Fantastic shows, but all, as it were, from another exotic world. Suddenly, Oliver seemed to be from the same world as the people who were going to the show inhabited. And so it was this phenomenal success. And after, I was just playing one of the boys in the workhouse, which was ironic because my dad's first job for the LCC was in the very last workhouse in London, in Stepney. But after the show had been on for about 3 or 4 weeks, the boy who was playing the Artful Dodger bunked off school one Tuesday afternoon, forgetting that it was a matinee. And like any kid who bunks off school, they couldn't be found. So about a quarter of an hour before the curtain was due to go up, the theatre manager came into the kids' dressing room in a right old state, as you can imagine, pulled me to one side and said, "Tony, do you know the part of the Artful Dodger?" Which, of course, I did. All us kids knew the whole show from beginning to end. We used to recite it to each other for fun. We were 13. Our minds were unsullied by drink and drugs. Just like 13-year-olds today. And it's the first time I've ever got a laugh from a 13-year-old on that. So I went on as the Artful Dodger. And do you remember the song Consider Yourself? Yeah. I didn't. I went, this is true, I went, consider yourself. La, la. And basically the audience warmed to my interpretation of the Artful Dodger as a young boy tragically struck down by juvenile dementia. And I became the permanent understudy to the Artful Dodger. So I played it loads of times because we were all under 15, we all had to have 3 weeks off every 3 months, including the boy who played the Artful Dodger. So I went to play on stage lots of times. And because the show had been so successful, all of us kids who were in it became, as it were, marketable commodities. And we went on to be in lots of other shows. Some of you older ones might remember Stop the World, I Want to Get Off with Anthony Newley, and I played Tony Newley's son in that. And I remember I had a bit part in a movie with Judy Garland and Dirk Bogarde, and I told everybody about it, and my bit was cut, so it was humiliating. But while this was going on, I was also at a co-ed grammar school, Wanstead County High School on the fringes of London. Nobody ever knew whether I was supposed to be at school or doing some part in the West End. So I used to bunk off school all the time. Whole terms would go by when in the morning I would stay off school, and then I would pop into school for a spot of lunch and a game of football, and then leave after lunch. But the ridiculous thing is, where did I go? Down the local library. And I just read all the time. And I was 14. I can remember discovering Graham Greene and Robert Graves, all those badly written but glorious historical novels that Robert Graves wrote about Milton and about Homer and about the Byzantine Empire and the First World War, of course. So I would get interested in them. Then I'd go to that section in the library and read all about that stuff. Theology, I was reading, not that I understood or can remember anything about it. I was reading Martin Heidegger when I was like about 15. So I read Sartre because of the novels and then started reading the philosophical stuff. And it wasn't that I didn't have a brain the size of the Isle of Wight. I'm not, Stephen Fry, I'm not. I haven't got that kind of criminal record. But But what it meant was, I became this awful word, autodidact, isn't it? But it became something like that I knew how to interrogate a subject. I worked out how to pursue a subject and how to ask questions of a subject and then look for the stuff and read up on the stuff. I mean, the tragedy was that I had no idea which of the 9 books on any particular subject was the good one, and so I probably came up with a plethora of these von Daniken-type half-baked ideas, but nevertheless, I had worked that stuff out for myself. But then I would go into school, and in order to get through the exams, I would cheat. In my French O-level, I wrote down all this French vocabulary down the inside of my arm. And I had the black blazer, and there's a mum there covering her son's ears up. So I got the black I've got the black blazer, right? And there's the shirt there with the little button there, and it's got this little hole there, so I could slide it up and down my arm. It's like a little window with all the French words on. Unfortunately, I didn't write down what they meant in English, so I just peppered my French essay in my O-level with all these words. It must have been like James Joyce for them to read. And I failed. But it's weird. My life was so weird. I feel so slightly uncomfortable, slightly embarrassed even now talking about it. So I'm doing all this acting. I'm going to school, except I'm not going to school, and cheating. At the same time, from about the age of 13, I was politically incredibly active. This was the time of the Aldermaston marches. And why I was so engaged politically from that early age, I still really haven't got a clue. I mean, I can kind of work out what reasons possibly why. Maybe something to do with the fact that, like Hitler and Napoleon, I'm quite short. But I really do have no idea. I was Secretary of Youth CND, I was Chair of Youth Anti-Apartheid, I was very active in the Youth United Nations Association. So all these 3 things were going on in the body of this child. I was about that high when I was about 14 or 15. And when I see myself on the telly now, that's still what I see. It's just this rather squeaky kid with these 3 really diverse passions. And because I was pretty articulate and well-read, although I'd done so badly in my exams, my teachers put me into the Oxbridge set. But for those of you who remember back to the days of O-levels, that meant this is a boy who cheated in order to get his 4 O-levels. In order to pass the exams to get to Oxford or Cambridge, I would have had to have got use of English O-level, Latin O-level, Maths O-level, plus 3 A-levels, plus an S-level. And I I didn't know how to do any work at all. I didn't know how to do schoolwork. I could go down in the library and read avariciously, but there was this huge gap of comprehension between myself and schoolwork. So I said, I want to go to drama school. I want to go to drama school. I didn't at all. Because I thought I was God's gift to acting. We all did, all us little kids did, because we were petted and praised for doing that. And so I got in. RADA said come back the following year. I got into the Central School of Speech and Drama, Central, when I was just 17. So I was the youngest there. I mean, some of the kids there. I think the oldest was 28, and there were lots of 24, 25-year-olds. So I still, I felt very much like that, but nevertheless, at least I was in my own environment, or thought I was, except on the first day, the principal said to me, he said, everybody in this year is going to have a real struggle to get through the three years of a drama school. But Tony, you are going to have the biggest struggle of all, because you'll have to unlearn everything that you've learned so far, all those bad habits, in order to get to some kind of neutral place, so that you can then learn the skills which you'll need if you're to survive as an adult actor. And that was the last thing in the world I wanted to hear. As far as I was concerned, I'd been really bright and a little bit wahey by getting out of pressure at school, by going to drama school to do something that was as easy as falling off a log. And I was suddenly told that it was going to be the hardest thing I'd ever done. So it was an enormous struggle for me, but also an intense... It saved me, really. So many of those child actors who I remember from that time were kind of lost, certainly as young adults, because the high point of their lives was when they were 12 or 13. That's what they remembered as when they were at their most successful, when they had blossomed. And then everything like that was an anticlimax. They all walked around with a feeling of loss. It's one of the hardest things, I think, about acting. I used to know a lot of the guys and girls who did the Carry On movies, and I saw that same look in their eyes when the Carry On's finished, and now Time Team is finished. I see it in the eyes of my archaeologist friends. So that was such a relief to have got that, and I left drama school. I worked for a number of years. I finally got Blackadder. I mean, maybe someone will want to pursue Blackadder a bit later on, and that was enormously successful. And then I was approached about doing Time Team. And at the time, I remember there was an enormous amount of antagonism from a lot of senior archaeologists and from the posh papers. The tabloids always loved Time Team right from the beginning. But one of the things that offended them so much was that somebody who they perceived to have been a comic was going to front Time Team, whereas as far as I was concerned, doing comedy was just one of the things that I did. And I saw myself, above all else, as somebody who was engaged and somebody who cared very much about finding an appropriate vocabulary so that we could all understand things which appeared to many of us to be very difficult because of the language and the vocabulary which were always used to describe them. So there was a real kind of disjuncture between how some people saw me and how I saw myself. And I think the Red Tops instinctively understood that, whereas possibly some other people didn't. So that was how I landed up at the beginning of Time Team. So what is that? Yeah, we thought I might rabbit for about 20 minutes. So Helen, are you going to officiate the asking of questions?
I am, but I want to give you a clap because that was so lovely. Well done. I can't do anything without a script, so I've got to see what I was going to say. Oh, apart from that was such a lovely, wonderful introduction to the three strands of your life. And I didn't know that about the library, because I also spent at least a year of my life in a library reading all the biographies of kings and queens. When I got to the end of the shelf, on the shelf below was archaeology. And I didn't even know archaeology existed. And it was Bath Library that made me an archaeologist, and I'm very fond of libraries. I think
On Time Team, it's always been such a relief to me to know that Dr. Geek, when she was in her late teens, was really, really bad.
Yeah, I have experienced unemployment, 2 government schemes, being told off by the police a lot of times. We'll draw a veil now because I'm a proper well-behaved academic. Anyway, right now we've got lots of time for questions. But as Jamie said at the beginning, for posterity, we need you to be clear and to be recorded. And so that's why you're going to need to wait for the microphone. It's not because we can't hear you in the hall, it's because posterity needs to hear you. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and find a couple of people to ask a question, and then the people with the microphones can zoom around, making sure you've got the microphone before you start speaking. And I'm also, I need to remind you, when you ask your question, tell us your name, and also, because of those all-important prizes, if you're an undergraduate or if you're under 18, don't forget to tell us. Okay, so who would like to go first? I can see somebody right at the back. These lights are a bit much, and somebody in front of you with a big black watch strap on. So let's take you two first.
Hello, my name's Rachel, and I am an undergraduate. You touched on archaeology and why you think that it's really important to be able to kind of present and preserve information to tell other people that wouldn't necessarily understand it in the academic language. But I was wondering what you thought about the balance between the importance of kind of preservation and having things available for people to look at themselves in archaeology, and perhaps being able to find out more information if it requires destructive tests, like some of the chemical analysis that we can do.
It's a very interesting question. Some mornings I wake up and think, if I was Prime Minister, I would ban archaeological excavation completely for the next 50 years. The fact is that archaeology as a discipline is so intrusive. We're learning, obviously, through the various scientific skills that we've got to make it less so. But it seems to me still... Remember that Pitt Rivers, who was really the foundation of British archaeology, is only, I think it was the 1880s, wasn't it, when he really started developing a systematic vision for archaeology. So it's a science which is only about 130 years old. So frankly, all of us, even, the Renfrews of this world, we're still clobbing around in Wellington boots, crushing up all this stuff and destroying the evidence. It's a bit like we were draining every village pond so we could have a look at the fish. And not only are we doing that, but there has been a history, I think a rather duplicit history in archaeology, whereby archaeology tends to be limited to those people who are considered to be sufficiently educated and trained enough to do it. But on the other hand, often those people are so obsessed by the sheer act of doing archaeology that they never properly record what they've done. And I felt that terribly strongly when we were doing Time Team, that there was a bit of criticism initially about, oh, well, when you've done it, what do? We do post-X. Of course we would do post-X. That's what archaeologists are supposed to do. But you would hear criticism from people who you've known 30 or 40 years ago were digging some of the most iconic sites in Britain. And the recording was either very poorly done or else sometimes not done at all. And there are so many stories of archaeologists dying and people going in to clear out the stuff. And under their bed, there's all this archaeology undated and unlabelled in shoeboxes. And where does it go? On the skip. In parenthesis, that's why I think many of us appear to be so antagonistic towards metal detectorists. It's not that we're opposed to that technology. How can you be opposed to a technology. That's kind of madness. But unless it's properly labelled and recorded, and I think Helen would agree with me on this, somebody picks up this Anglo-Saxon brooch, they're terribly proud of it, they put it on their mantelpiece, no one else really knows what it is. 30 years later, when they die, it goes out on the skip, and that's it. No one knows where it came from, so no one else knows where to look for similar brooches or whatever. But as I say, if that's true of metal detectorists, there has been a strain within archaeology of whom that is true of as well. And when we were doing Time Team, often we would dig other people's sites. And it's probably the first time that digging has been closely scrutinised for a number of years. And although, of course, during time, people get more sophisticated, so it would be foolish to do a devastating critique of a dig that was done in the 1930s, let's say. Nevertheless, even in the 1960s and 1970s, me, who is not an archaeologist, I've seen evidence of really, really shoddy archaeology. And we go to museums to see the archaeology that came out from these other excavations, and it can't be found. Time after time after time that has happened. So this idea, which I think that sometimes in archaeology people like to perpetuate, on one side there is the skilled, thoughtful expert working hard long into the night, every night, in order to produce something for our heritage. And on the other side, there's the shambling, bumbling, treasure-seeking, clod-hopping amateur who will just ruin everything for our heritage. I really think that is something that is very oversimplified. And given that there is so much in store, so much in store of bones and pot and stuff which could tell us huge stories now that we've got such better technology. I think there is, theoretically at least, an argument that says, just stop digging for a minute and look at what you've got. It's a bit like, it's a bit like kids on Boxing Day, isn't it? They're still opening all the toys, and the toys are all over the flipping room, and Mum's going, don't open any more for a bit, darling. Don't just concentrate on this one here. And no, I want another one. I want another. Oh, the kids get like junkies over Christmas, don't they? And that seems to me off. In my ignorance, that often seems to me the state that archaeology can get itself into. Of course, there are masses of honourable exceptions to that, but as I say, in my dark times, that's how I feel. There are, of course, huge problems about that. There's the issue of rescue archaeology. If someone's going to be driving a pile driver into the ground, then we can either examine it now, or the concrete's going to go in 4 days' time. A lot of people said at the beginning of Time Team, Time Team doesn't represent archaeology. You're racing against the clock in order to get the stuff up as quickly as possible. Anyone who's ever excavated in a Tesco's or a motorway will know that that's exactly what you're forced into doing. And as budgets contract, more archaeology is like that. So yes, of course, that kind of archaeology must go on, although given the financial crash, as there is no new building currently taking place in Britain, maybe that's a slightly more arid argument now. There's also, of course, the question of skills, isn't there? If the less field archaeology that you do, then the less opportunity there is, as it were, to pass the trowel from generation to generation, and it is vital. We have some of the finest archaeologists in the world. That's been one of the big pluses of being the imperial power in the late 19th century. We could just go anywhere and dig their shit. And we have passed that on from generation to generation, and that's great. So of course there are arguments for a lot more digging. But what we always try to do on Time Team, and I think if there is a justifiable criticism of Time Team, it's that we were never quite able to explain this enough to people. What we were always doing was simply keyhole surgery. Our idea was not to dig up all the archaeology like Rio Tinto Zinc digs an open cast mine. The idea was simply to assess what is there, apart from anything else, because given what a new science archaeology is, anything we do now, the evidence will be destroyed, simply in the process of digging it. Whereas if we save it for future generations, they're going to have so much more perception about what's there that we currently can't do at all. So what we've always tried to do, which I'm sure you'll agree is what an enormous amount of archaeology does, is simply to assess what's there, to encourage the narrative to begin and the discussions to begin, so that at some later date people can then dig more. But we never take all the stuff out. People, the biggest question I think that I'm ever asked after do I have a cunning plan is, aren't you frustrated that you only have 3 days in order to dig the archaeology? No, that is what we do. That is our job, to describe what we can within those 3 days. If we find something very interesting on day 3, we won't dig it. We will get as close as we can to recording what's there. I mean, just occasionally we've been in the situation, had on that wonderful Anglo-Saxon site where all those brooches came up, where the stuff is there, and it was actually more sensible to lift it than not. And we've done that on day 4, not in front of the cameras. We simply haven't got the money to leave the cameras rolling for the 4th day. But by and large, we have done our best to represent what we think is the progressive end of British archaeology. Sorry, that was... I feel quite strongly about that. You may have noticed that.
The person at the back, have you got a microphone?
My name is Pauline and I'm an undergraduate.
Great.
It's a simple question, but what was the best or the most exciting excavation that you've done with Time Team?
What was the best and most exciting excavation I've ever done on Time Team? Well, the funny thing about that question is that all of us would give different answers to that. Helen's, I'm sure, would be some Anglo-Saxon buckle for a woman to dangle keys from.
Something like that.
For me, for Phil Harding, of course, it would be a bit of flint, which we would much rather go down the pub than spend any more time on at all. And for Mick Aston, one of the most dyed-in-the-wool atheists I've ever met, it would be some glimmer of 13th century monastic life. What I like best is the mark of ordinary human beings in the landscape. I've always felt that the problem about most history is that it tends to be about kings and queens and generals and nobility, simply because they were the only people who could afford to have their lives recorded, or the lives of their deeds recorded. And so the lives of ordinary people tend to feel fairly grey and Pythonesque compared with the kind of stuff that the upper classes are doing. Whereas, by and large, archaeology is the mark of ordinary people in the landscape. And I seem to remember you and I have talked about this, that what is so great is that sometimes you find the most exquisite pieces of manufacture made with the most appropriate technology that was possible at the time, and you revel in the skills of these nameless people who made it. Sometimes you find the crappiest botched jobs from hundreds of years ago, made by the baldricks of hundreds and thousands of years ago. All this badly woven stuff. Have you seen like the sort of the late 4th century patches in Roman pavements and Roman floors where they've just kind of thrown vague bits of yellow and red down somewhere that's leaked? It's great. It's fantastic. It tells you so much. As far as the most exciting thing, and this is a Roman pavement. We dug what turned out to be the biggest Roman villa in southern England that had been discovered since the war. And it's on day 2. The Roman mosaic specialist we had with us said to me, I reckon about 2 inches further down there, we're going to hit a Roman mosaic floor. And I said, oh, wow, that's be exciting. Can I watch? And he passed me the trowel and said, you excavated. And I said, I can't, I'm not an archaeologist. I know the Radio Times has said I'm the most famous archaeologist in Britain, which so pisses some people off. But I'm not, I have no training in archaeology. I don't want to damage anything. He said, look, it's a floor. It's a floor. The whole thing about a floor is that you make it so people can walk on it, don't you? If you have a floor that you can damage easily, it's a lousy floor. This floor has been there for, probably 1,700 years. He said, look, just to make you relax, I'll be at your shoulder. Here's the trowel. You excavate it. And I just had this sheer joy of just slowly peeling away, sweep after sweep, this mosaic. And first of all, there was just like little white mosaics. I thought, I wonder if there's another colour there. And then there's a bit of black. And I know you shouldn't chase anything in archaeology, but I just went sideways and had a look at the pattern. And then we came in again, and there's a bit of red. And is there going to be a thing? Is there going to be a thing? So, and there's an arcanthus. I didn't know it was an arcanthus until I was told. It's like a little pot of flowers and stuff. And gradually, and with the help of other people, we peeled away this whole thing. And I was the first person to see that floor for 1,700 years, which it was an extraordinary, moving moment to be so close to that period of history in that spot. The only downer was that in the middle of it, there were 3 slightly arcing parallel gouges in the mosaic. And that was from deep ploughing, and they'd only been deep ploughing that field for the last 5 years.
Who's going to be the next person? There's somebody with their hand up there, and there's somebody with their hand up close to the wall there.
Hi, so it sounds like you've lived a very interesting and engaging life. If you could sing a song to sum up your life, what would it be and why? And can you sing a little bit of it?
I will give Tony a moment to think about that, because I don't think you gave us your name.
Oh yeah, Finn Adams, Pembroke College, and I'm an undergrad.
So you say. Now you've had plenty of time.
I will survive. I think what I've always enjoyed so much, and I think it has been a theme through my life, which would possibly be represented by Dave Clark's song Bits and Pieces, which was the hit after Glad All Over for those 60s people in the audience. I don't have a very long, emotionally I don't have a very long concentration span. I love moving from thing to thing. And every day I'm not sure what it is that I've actually got to do that day until I check the diary that my manager makes for me. And she actually colour codes the diary so I can see whether it's filming or whether it's writing or whether it's interviewing or whether it's acting or whatever. And I think the reason that I was able to survive as a performer, it was partly, it's funny because it's a very strong gag question. I applaud your question. But I learned to read music when I was in the church choir at school, so I could always sing. And I was small. That meant that when I left drama school, in addition to doing all the Chekhovs and Ibsens and things that Shaws and all that everybody else could do, I could also do things that only small people could do, like being Freddie the Happy Spoon in a children's play. and I could be in musicals as well. I learnt to write, actually, when I was in my late 30s, which gave me another string to my bow. And so I've always just gone from one thing to another. So I have, whereas most actors, as you know, are out of work probably 7 months of the year, I have not had a day out of work for probably the last 30 years. Can I quickly tell you about learning to write, which is that when I was in Blackadder, almost arbitrarily, Hutchinson's, the publishers Hutchinson's, approached me and said, would you write a book about Theseus? That's because I'd done a kid's book about Theseus, because I'd done quite a lot of Greek drama, spent a long time studying Aeschylus at the National, and I'd got a lot of ideas about Greek drama. So I wanted to write a kid's story about Theseus. This was the time when my kids were, 7 and 5, something like that. And I said yes, because a freelancer always says yes when they're offered a job, doesn't it? And then I panicked and I thought, I don't know how to write. And so I went to a friend of mine in Blackadder and I said, I have no idea how to write this damn thing. Would you write it with me and we'll split the money? And he said, you can do it on your own. I said, I can't. I wouldn't even know where to begin. He said, I'll tell you what I'll do. He said, you write the first chapter and then drive up to Oxford, come and see me, and we'll just discuss it together. So I drove up to Oxford and he said, look, you don't need those first 3 paragraphs, do you? You're just writing yourself in there. How about cut those first 3 paragraphs? See what happens if you start there. And you see that servant there. You haven't described what that servant's like. What gender? She's a she. Okay, she's a she. What's she like? Why is she there? What's she look like? What's her hobbies? Is she married? Who's her boyfriend? All those kinds of questions. And they say, you see that gag? That takes a whole page before you get to the punchline. See if you can reduce that to about 3 lines. Just set it up, ease us towards the gag line, bosh, do the gag. And occasionally he'd say, that para's nearly there. I can't quite describe to you what's wrong with it. Look, I'll just redraft that para. Have a look at that. See, now see if you can get the rest, the next few paras into that groove. And he did that to me for 3 books. And then I was commissioned to write a 4th book, and I rang him up and I said, Dick, I don't actually need to come up to Oxford at the end of each chapter anymore, because I can always hear your flipping voice. In fact, by and large, I've stopped doing all those things which you used to nag me about, because I know otherwise I'll just have to redo them, because you're telling me I've got to redo them. So I reckon I can do it on my own now. And he said, don't you realise that is the moment I've been waiting for ever since we started on these books together. And Dick is Richard Curtis. So I actually got 3 books worth of tutorials from the man who went on to be the most successful British screenwriter ever. And it never surprised me that he decided to set up Comic Relief, because although he is one of the toughest men I know, with a backbone of steel, he has got that kind of generosity whereby he would devote that amount of time to a friend just to encourage them to write. And I think I've written 24 books now. I've certainly written over 20 for kids and 4 or 5 for adults. But I'll plug my latest kids' books right at the end, just before you go, so you remember the titles.
Right, by the wall.
This is a stupid question to ask. So
Give us your name.
My name's Stevie. It's a stupid question to ask because I've got my parent right next to me, but did you feel guilty for skipping school in the end? Because I do on occasion skip school.
The problem with skipping school so much is I think probably I would have done similar sorts of things if I hadn't skipped school to the things that I've ended up doing. All my mates who didn't skip off school and went to university, who surround me, are 10 years younger than me, and I think that is no coincidence. I think I lost 10 years. I think it took me much longer to acquire the facility to do all those things, because I wasn't surrounded by other people who were going through the same experiences, and I wasn't able to get the experiences of older teachers in order to develop. Did I feel guilty at the time? Yes, I did, but it was that kind of frisson of dangerous guilt that we all love. But I think more practically, to bunk off school that much is you're wasting time later on, and I think that's the shame about it. The advantage is that I've had a very different very different life, and I think very different attitudes from an awful lot of my mates through not going through that whole process. But, you know, I wouldn't make such a fuss about it if I hadn't wanted to come here rather than leave school at 16, would I?
And I'd second that, because I left school at 17. I did get my A-levels, but I was far too young when I did them, and I didn't understand what they were all about. And it then took me 2 years to find a university that would accept me after, I think, 15 said, no, thank you very much, we don't like you. And it took me, just like you, much, much longer to get through things. But as I'm a late developer anyway, I think, I actually wasn't ready to go to university until I was about 20. But I don't think it's an easy start in life to not get school, either not go, or as I did, I went. My bum was on the seat, but nothing was going in. So it's not an easy option.
I think it was going in your bum.
As I say, I wasn't very clever. I didn't know you were supposed to. I discovered that people were revising for exams, and I said, you can't do that, that's cheating. It's supposed to be a test of what you know.
I was always, one of the odd, going back to that thing about these different things I've done, I was on the national executive of the Labour Party for a long time. Now, I was there at the time when this notion of 50% of 18-year-olds going to university started to become a reality. And I always had a deep unease about that, simply out of my own experience. I just felt, well, this notion that 18 is the correct moment at which the majority of the population is somehow going to flower intellectually just didn't seem to me to marry up with the reality of the world. Apart from all the arguments about if you say 50% go to university, immediately, not only does that imply that the other 50% are second rate, but we all know all those resources got hived off in order to get that 50% to university, and so much education was left impoverished. And Mick Aston is much more articulate about this than I can ever be, because he had the experience of it as someone who spent most of his life doing adult education and extramural education. He found year after year all those resources disappearing as universities had to jump through that hoop of getting 50% of kids into university at 18. I mean, I know this is a utopian dream, but I just wish it was easier to incorporate ways of people at a whole variety of ages engaging in a much more active way in this thing that we call education.
Absolutely. Can I take you at the front in the red and you in the stripes by the wall? Well, have we got a microphone for the front?
By the way, there are two in red down there.
Oh, sorry. Tony's just pointed out that with his superior skills of observation, he's pointed out there's two in red, whereas I'm actually trained archaeologist, field walker, excavator, observer, and I didn't notice that.
Tony, when you signed on to Blackadder, were you thinking of it in terms of putting a human face on history, as you've described, as kind of retrospectively your kind of career goal? Were you thinking of it at the time of, you know, you're playing the everyman, you're playing the social history rather than the royal history? Did you think of it as part of your history trajectory, or did you think of it as, you know, this is a brilliant script, this is an acting job that's brilliant?
It's interesting. I've often wondered that myself. There is no way that I, as a freelance, could be offered that job, and then kind of magically it fulfills all my aspirations because I've decided I will go for that job because it does, if you see what I mean. I got it just arbitrarily. It really was arbitrary. I can remember I was living in a commune in Bristol, which I think you can understand that part of my life immediately by that phrase, can't you? And I was living in the basement and everyone else had gone out, and I heard a thump at the front door, big letter coming in the front door. So I think, oh, what's that? I go up to the ground floor, and there is a big brown envelope on the mat, And it's got the big white sticker on it with the BBC crest. And the only time anybody ever got one of those was if they were being sent a script. And I thought, it's got my name on it. Why am I being sent a script? If it was a job, I would have to go off for 3-4 interviews before I got any sort of job at all. So I opened it up, and it was a script for a pilot for a new comedy series starring Rowan Atkinson. And there was a little letter, I think this was on the Thursday, a little letter saying, we start rehearsals on Monday. Would you like to be this comic servant called Baldrick? And I thought, wow, this is amazing. I thought, mind you, if they've sent it on Thursday and they're starting on Monday, I am definitely not the first choice. And so I started browsing through this script. I couldn't find this flipping part anywhere. Oh, yes, there's one there. It says yes. and honestly, in the original script, it was about 8 or 9 lines. And they had wanted they wanted a couple of stooges to work with Rowan, but because it was such a small part, virtually every other comic member of British Actors Equity had turned it down. I think Tim Sproul actually turned it down. I'm not absolutely sure. I think so. But there had been part of me that had always felt that if I could ever be involved in what I always thought of as Oxbridge humour, that was the week that was, which happened in the early 1960s. It was the most wonderful programme there had ever been on television as far as I was concerned. The cheek of them putting on something that was so iconoclastic was amazing. I remember that on a Saturday night, parties would stop when that was the week was on. You'd knock on bedrooms and open the door. Hey, that was the week that's on. 2 people would come out and watch the show and then run back in again. Everyone was so excited by it. And then, of course, the Pythons and John Cleese and John Fortune, John Bird, Eleanor Bron, and latterly not the 9 o'clock news. If only I could be part of that. But there was no way that I could. I wasn't part of that charmed circle of Oxbridge wits. So that when I got this script, I thought, I'm sure that if I could get in with these people, there is something I could contribute. I always feel that what they do is so close to where I am as a person. And, it answered all my dreams. It couldn't have been better than it was. And they were all passionate about history. They were all passionate about text. They always wanted to push everything just that little bit too far. All those things that I had always wanted to do. And yes, there was a radicalism about all of them. I remember there was a great article before. Would it have been? It was probably before the 1997 election. The Sun did a list of 20 people in show business who are a threat to our democracy. And 4 of them were in Blackadder. So I think it was more that I found my soul brothers. Sadly, very few soul sisters. It was they didn't know how to write for women. That was why that was why the first few days of the second series were really traumatic, because they'd written this character of Queen Elizabeth, but none of them knew how to write comedy for women. And Miranda Richardson came in and really kind of struggled with it. But then about halfway through that first week of rehearsals, she just got the notion that this is a young girl who is on that cusp of horses and boyfriends, but doesn't really understand where she is at the moment. But she also happens to be the most powerful 13-year-old the world has ever known, And as soon as she got that, the part blossomed, and Blackadder the Second became the success that it was.
Can I just say to Lady in the Stripes, have you still got a microphone? Can you tell us your name?
Sophie.
Thank you.
And do you want a bar of chocolate, Sadie?
if that's okay.
Right, lady in red.
My name's Eve. When you're doing Time Team, when you're doing the dig, what's your favourite point in history to get to excavate from?
What's my favourite point in history to excavate from? Gosh, there's so many different answers to that. If you said to me, which bit of history would you like to be in, I would say, without doubt, now. Today. Because we're all warm, because we know where the next meal is going to come from. By and large, we're not going to be threatened by soldiers or the police. We've got roofs over our head. You know, all the things that most people in the world have never known for sure they're going to happen, we get now. And I think that we constantly forget just how extraordinarily lucky we are to be alive now. I mean, I think most of us don't have the right ever to feel glum in the morning. I mean, most of the people in this room are really grouchy when they get out of bed most days. Aren't you? But actually, you know, we are so blessed just to be alive now that we really shouldn't be at all. So that would be like my period in history. As far as excavating is concerned, well, I love doing the Roman stuff because you get. The Romans left so much behind them. They made it out of stuff that survives till today. So when you're showing it to an audience, you can show, like, you know, real pairs of scissors and real floors, like I was saying, machines, great big bits of wall. So an ordinary audience gets excited about that. The time that Helen gets so excited about the Anglo-Saxons, an awful lot of the stuff that was made out of wood and things like that. So an awful lot of it has disappeared, isn't it? And it's only the metal stuff that survives. There are other periods where you hardly find anything at all except great shadows in the ground, which is actually where a whole, maybe like this really huge building was concerned, maybe like a great hall that was this size, and all there is a bit of mud. And I can't get that excited about that. Occasionally, I pretend I'm a little bit more excited than I actually am.
And I'd like to just interrupt and remind the audience that, of course, the Roman period, because I grew up in Bath, where it seemed to me at school that we knew everything about the Romans, that they built baths, we didn't think about why, we just knew that they did. Nice hot water, why wouldn't you? We understood them. Whereas the Anglo-Saxons, who left almost nothing behind, were so incredibly mysterious. And maybe the Romans are... Did you say easy? Maybe I said easy. But the Anglo-Saxons are far stranger and more mysterious, and that's what gets me going. It's the mystery.
And you must go down to the British Museum and see this new Ice Age art exhibition, because I think most of us, even academics, there's part of us that thinks that when you get back to prehistory, people were basically dead thick. And you go back, like, you see the stuff from 45,000 years ago, musical instruments with 5 holes in, beautifully carved animals and little statues of people. And some people say that it wasn't until the beginning of this century that people began to be able to carve as well as that again. And of course, if they got those skills 45 years ago, that kind of implies that they learnt them an awful long time ago before that, so they could get up to that position. So some people saying, now we were talking about this at lunchtime, actually, that maybe the people who came out of Africa were playing musical instruments and banging drums and carrying carvings with them. I just had this image of this person coming out, the first person out of Africa with his flute, and everyone going, yeah, this way.
Lovely. Now, I haven't turned over to here very much. 2 ladies just here and here. If we can have the microphones over. I'm making the microphone people do lots of running about, I think. Down front row, and the lady in the blue. Lovely. Okay.
My name's Frances Small, and I wanted to ask you about the other programme that you did, The Worst Jobs in History. What made you do it, and what did you really find was the worst job in history?
The worst job in history is being the man who presents a series called The Worst Jobs in History. Because you have to do every flipping one. Each one you do, you don't know how to do it. At least the people who did the worst jobs in history got to learn how to do it. By the end of making that series, my back was done in, I was exhausted, I was riddled with coughs and colds and sneezes. It took me the best part of a year to get over doing that series. And that in itself was pretty salutary. Again, the fact that we tend to think that people who did what we construe as quite menial tasks in previous times were in some way, I don't know, I think I've always seen most of them as a bit sort of weedy, apart from archers, who we know had one big shoulder. But apart from that, but of course, in order to survive in most times, you had to develop a kind of robustness and a doggedness that most of us nowadays simply don't have. I was always fine with the disgusting jobs. I've never had a problem with disgusting jobs. So, for instance, the manufacture of leather, which requires a great big bowl into which you put chicken poo and cow wee and horse wee. You know when I love it nowadays. If you've ever been in a leather shop and I see someone pick up a handbag and go, oh, leather smell. But and I was. There's one place down in Devon where they still make it the old way. Lord knows how they are able to do it, given health and safety nowadays. But they have these big vats, and I was there in a thunderstorm, and as soon as the thunderstorm started, these still vats of Manx started going. Somehow the electricity in the air conjured up the evil that makes leather. But I always found those easy to do. It was the height that I always found difficult. I had to climb the second highest, the outside of the second highest spire in Oxfordshire. Now, when you see a spire when you're like that far away, it slants like that, doesn't it? When you're at the bottom of it, it's perpendicular. And climbing up the outside of that, I did find extraordinarily difficult. And also the other one was... one of the things about the Vikings was they lived by and large around the coast, as we know. In the winter, there was the problem of how do you find food of sufficient calorific value. And one of the things which was a prize to them was guillemot eggs. And they used to make rope out of ivy and stuff and go down the outside of the cliffs and rescue guillemot eggs. And I had to do that on the Gower Peninsula, dressed as a Viking. And I had never abseiled before in my life. And I went over the edge, and the guy who's like teaching me for the first time I've ever done it, he's going, look into my eyes, and I'm which is fine. And then I came to a big boulder, and I kind of disappeared over it. And I couldn't see him anymore, and my feet weren't against the rock. I was just dangling there, and there was silence from up above, and I'm just dangling there, swaying. And then I look down, and like there's another 100 feet, and then the crashing waves, and then this rope slowly started to spin round. And they actually recorded the comment that I made, which they played back to amuse senior executives at Channel 4 for some time afterwards. And I won't use the actual word because there's a lot of young people in the front row. Instead, I'll say quacking when I come to them. I said, "Can someone pull me up, please? Because I'm dangling here like a quacking conker." So that was my least favourite job.
My name's Louise, and I have been an undergraduate for quite a long time. But I am a children's librarian, so I'm interested. You've written an awful lot for children, which is brilliant because history is my subject, and trying to get children engaged is something that I do on the quiet, being a children's librarian. What got you writing for children?
Oh, thank you. Oh, what am I writing for children right now? I published a series for Macmillan called Tony Robinson's Weird World of Wonders. It's based on the hypothesis that everything in the world is weird, wonderful, and interesting. There are certainly boring ways of talking about things, but everything is part of this extraordinary thing that we call life, that none of us really understand, but it's all life, so it's all wonderful. We just need to find the vocabulary to express our excitement about it. And I've written about the ancient Egyptians and the Greeks and the Romans, the British Empire. It's World Book Day in a couple of weeks' time, and I've written a book on inventions for World Book Day. Oh, I must tell you, because I've been researching great inventions. This is my favourite great invention. 19th century, roughly the year 1880, I think. Just about the time when people are starting to realise that there's this stuff from South America called rubber, which is impermeable and stops you getting wet. This guy, he invented this cloak, and he walked along it, all rubber, keeps him dry, and then he would get to a river, he would take the cloak off, and in the collar of it there was a nozzle like on a lilo. He would then blow air into it, drop it into the water, take 2 small oars out of his inside jacket pocket, row across the river, get out the other side, let out the air, and put his cloak back on. And it was called the boat cloak. But I thought, what's so lovely about that to me is that it's like every 1,000 ideas, they're all as daft as each other, aren't they? It's just like occasionally 1 or 2 of them fulfill what we as people require. And if you're thinking back to colonial times, it's quite, there's a logic about it. It feels Python-esque now. Another great one is from the 1930s. This bloke invented a glove, and you put teeth under the index finger and another row of teeth on top of the thumb, and then you put in your Big Mac and your chips and your milkshake, and you go like that, and you capture the goo in your other hand and tip it into your mouth. It was for people who were so lazy they couldn't be bothered to chew. And it was called the tooth glove. So I finished writing that. And for those of you who don't know, World Book Day is brilliant. National Book Tokens give a £1 book token to everybody in schools. Have you heard about this yet? Yeah. So, and 8 of us have written these short books, and you can exchange your book token for that book like you could if you wanted to exchange it for my book. Or else, you can buy, like if there's another book that's worth more than £3, you can put your pound towards that. And I'm spending quite a lot of the time at the moment I'm fronting the World Book Day for them, and there's like a big show at Queen Elizabeth Hall, and Anthony Horowitz is going to be there, and Shirley Hughes, whose books I read to my kids when I was little, and we'll be talking about books all day, and it'll be streamed to about 500,000 people. It's such a good idea, so big. And then a couple of weeks after that, I've got Tony Robinson's Weird World of Wonders World War II coming out, and then in September World War I, because obviously 2014 is the 100th anniversary, and I'm really enjoying doing that. I haven't written many children's books for the best part of 20 years, because I wrote them when I didn't write them for my kids. I think that's a misunderstanding of how authors write children's literature. You write into the space where you are when you're with kids. Do you understand what I mean by that? We all feel that place. We know that place, don't we? So you don't have to have kids around. If you're in that space, that's what you write to. Forgot what I was going to say now. Oh, I'll stop, because I can't think of something anymore.
Got time for a couple more. Nobody seems to want to ask. All right. Person over there with the glasses, and who else was over here? Oh dear, I have to do three. There's another lady in red there, the other one in red, and the very patient person by the aisle who's had her hand up for a while.
Oh, I know. I just remember what the final sentence of what I was going to say was. And I've started writing again, not consciously because of this, but it's quite interesting. I've now got 2 grandkids, a 3-year-old and a brand new one, and I've started writing books for kids again. It's weird.
My name is Randall Evans. I live in Trumpington, and we've just having a lot of new estates built, and they discovered a bed burial and a piece of jewellery there. Do you think it's important that things like that are left in situ, or is it okay to just dig them up, take them away, and let the builders get back on the land?
I think it's horses for courses, because it's going to depend an awful lot on the thing itself. I love it, particularly when things are actually architectural. I love it when they're incorporated into new build. Otherwise, you get the situation, in Bristol we've got it a lot, that's where I brought my kids up, where somebody has realised that something's like 900 years old, so you're not allowed to touch it. And it's just there in the landscape. Nobody knows what it is, gets covered in weeds, the smart kids tag it, and that's it, really. Mick Aston has said this, so I think it's cool because it annoys people. I would much rather that McDonald's bought it and turned it into a McDonald's, but the architecture was still there. That's what the French do, isn't it? So much more than we do. The Romans, today's Romans, used to do that an enormous lot. Respect what you've got, honour it, make sure people understand it, but incorporate it into the now. I think that's not always, but I think that's a healthy thing to do. The problem is when in Colchester, for instance, part of the Roman circus came up, and that was incorporated into a new developer's homes. I won't say which developer, it would be unfair, but it's the same name as a sherbet dip. And there's not many people know the name of sherbet. And they haven't done it well, and they've done it rather cynically. And then you've got the worst of all possible worlds. So when it's architecture, any strategy to honour it but keep it alive, I would go for. When it's fines, I think that's really, really hard. My instinct, by and large, would be to remove them if you found them. Because the problem is, all right, they've been under the earth for however long it is, hundreds, thousands of years, so maybe that's the most appropriate way to keep them. But if there is a memory now that they're there, someone will nick them. I mean, grave robbers were nicking the pyramids like 25 years after they were put up, weren't they? And I don't think we're any more sophisticated in that respect than the Egyptians. So would your instinct be, by and large, to remove fines if we
yes.
know they're there?
And my instinct is to try to keep them close by in a museum that's a local museum. Yeah. And so that you know where they are, and everybody else who doesn't know where they are can come across them and then go to Trumpington to see where they came from. It's an amazing grave and an amazing cemetery there, yeah.
It's funny for those people who aren't involved in archaeology, exactly that same debate that happens about the Elgin marbles, shouldn't they go back to Greece? That's where they came from, is happening more and more in Britain now. People are saying, why should they go to the British Museum? Why should they go to Birmingham? Why don't they go to Stoke or King's Lynn? And there are complicated arguments, but it's interesting that more and more people are becoming aware just of what Helen said.
Yes, and one of the problems, of course, is that some counties, like Suffolk, like Cambridgeshire, don't have a good county museum service, and so there is a hole into which these objects fall, where they don't fit with one museum and they don't fit with another, and they often do end up going to London, sadly.
But how different is that from Lord Elgin saying, well, yes, I've got to take this away, it's my responsibility, because you wouldn't look after them.
Right, lady in red at the front.
My name's Carolina, and my question is, what was your part originally in Oliver?
Are you over 18?
Pardon?
Are you more than 18 years old?
No.
You get a bar of chocolate. Just reminding you. What was my part in Oliver originally? Well, if you ever buy the old vinyl record of the stage musical of Oliver, not the film, the stage musical of Oliver, it's the one older people might remember. Oliver has got like a blue face and it's on a white background. It's made by Decca Records. When Oliver goes up to ask for more, the boy who was playing Oliver that day was wearing trainers. I was wearing hard shoes. So when you hear him go up to ask for more, it's my feet. I played... he was just one of the boys in the workhouse and in Fagin's gang. And you know that song, Food, Glorious Food? I had one line. What next is the question? So if ever you hear what next is the question, that's me.
Sorry, I was so taken with that, I forgot that I was supposed to be working. The lady up there, have you got a microphone? Just coming, great.
My name's Holly. I think one of the sheer delights about being at Cambridge, and I suppose university in general, is being surrounded by a load of brainiacs and people who are just so enthused about their subject. And the conversations you end up having with people are just amazing. I do English, but the things I find out about science, about archaeology, about history is just amazing. And do you feel that when you were working on Time Team, you were having the same experience?
No, because they're all pissed. Of course, the answer is yes. The people who have always been successful on Time Team in front of the camera are people like Helen, people like Carenza, like Mick, Francis Pryor, whose whole life has been about talking to the public about archaeology and getting enthused in it. Those people who've really struggled on Time Team have been archaeologists who've seen it much more as a discipline, which they can write about. And then if I was being catty, I'd say, and if anybody wants to read what they've written, then that is their privilege. And so virtually I think this is fair to say, virtually everybody on Time Team who's an archaeologist has come from continuing ed, further ed, portable antiquities scheme, that kind of thing. And it's not just that they're enthused, it's that they know how to articulate that excitement. And yes, that's always been an enormous pleasure. And rows, there have been real rows. I have seen Geophys in tears. And it's not because people hate each other, it's just that they care about the discipline so much and want it. And 3 days is hard, isn't it? You have to, as an archaeologist, you've got to make decisions. If you say quickly, it sounds like you're rubbishing the archaeology, and you're not. But you've just got to do it in such a disciplined way without any self-indulgence. And I think it's hard for anybody to keep that up for a long time. I have enormous respect for them, not to say an enormous amount of infection. That was a very interesting Freudian slip. Moving on.
I think we've got time for one more. Who'd like to have the last one? There's several hands up, and I'm a bit conscious that...
Look, if you do three, and I'll do all three of them really quickly.
All right. I just want to say, though, you're one of them, because as an early Anglo-Saxonist, every single early Anglo-Saxonist concentrates on women, because women are what's visible in the archaeological record, and I'm sorry that I have mainly concentrated on women, but I just don't think the men have been putting their hands up. So that man first, that lady sitting next to him nearly, and that lady over there.
Okay. Excuse me if I give just 1 minute answers, okay?
Okay. Is this on?
Yes.
Yep. I'm Piers.
That's the question?
I'm an undergraduate, but I guess the wine's probably run out by now. I was wondering, I guess it can just be a quick answer. It was going to be a 2-pronged question about whether you thought it was right, so the time was right for Time Team to finish, and also where you think you're going to get involved with archaeology now that it is finished.
Is it right that Time Team's finished now? It's lasted 20 years. For any television programme to do that is remarkable. So I just feel philosophical about it. I have concerns about who's going to fund archaeological digs, which is almost the antithesis of my answer to that first question, because EH can't afford to do the digging that it did, and National Trust can't, local authorities can't. And we were virtually, universities are struggling, aren't they, to provide the kind of digs that they used to. We were I think I'm right in saying that after EH, we were the biggest single funder of archaeological digs in the country. We have done more recorded digs than all the archaeology departments of all the unis over the last 20 years. So that is a massively big problem. I don't know what will happen to television's archaeology next. My bet is it won't just be an excavation programme. It'll take some time, I think, before enough new thinking will have taken place to find a new way of telling that story. I suspect it'll go back to finds a bit more for a while. Something will come up, it'll be weird and wonderful. Whether either of us or any of us will be involved, who knows?
And your neighbour.
Hi, I'm Georgie. I was wondering if you think archaeology needs a presence in the media in terms of like a TV programme like Time Team, or if it can just sustain itself as a discipline.
Does archaeology need some kind of media presence? I'm not the right person to answer that. It frustrates me that a lot of the archaeological culture in this country, on one hand, wants that kind of coverage, but on the other hand is so contemptuous of it. And I think really archaeology itself has got to be a bit more honest with itself about what it actually wants. Archaeology on the telly is never going to be archaeology. It's always going to be telly, just like any book that is made into a film isn't the book, it's the film. And it's a categorizing mistake, which I wouldn't expect academics to make, but time and time again, they do. Viewers don't, but archaeologists often do. And I think if archaeology, be it, the guys in York or whoever, decide that they want a firm presence, they really need to think about exactly what it is that they want and what they're prepared to compromise in order for that to happen. And I don't see very many signs of that in a lot of important areas of archaeology.
So everybody think about that, and next time you have something interesting to say, if you've got Richard III under your bed, then make sure you ring up the newspapers and let the whole world know about it. So our last question is the lady down here.
I'm Sophie. I'm in my last year of A-levels, and I was just wondering if you had an opinion as to where Richard III should be reburied.
The Richard III thing was so funny. In the Radio Times, at the top of the page, you have a strip with the pictures of all the people, of various people who are in the shows, and then underneath there's the blurb, which says about the programme. Above the Richard III programme, there was my photo, and in the blurb it said, Tony Robinson and the Time Team, look for Richard III. It was nothing to do with us whatsoever. Over last weekend, I had about 20 phone calls from different media outlets asking me what I thought about Richard III and this dig. And I had the joy of saying, dunno, they didn't ask me. I feel it's really, quite seriously, I think the answer is exactly the same as Helen gave. It's been in Leicester for so long. It seems to me that it's completely appropriate that it should remain in Leicester. I quite like the idea that other places want it because it creates a bit of furore. But I tell you what, the guy who deals with publicity for Leicester Council must be having the time of his life. Thank you. I've really enjoyed talking to you. I hope you've enjoyed the questions. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for coming along. Tony will be happy to stay a few minutes for autographs, is that right? Great. Just one final thing. The Personal Histories Project is run by volunteers and we rely heavily on kind donations from the public. If you would be willing to support our future work and future events like this, we would be very grateful, but there is absolutely no pressure. But for now, please join me again in thanking Tony for what has been a fantastic afternoon.